Good morning. Welcome to Conversations with Carla. Today is Monday, May 18th, 2020. Good morning. My name is Carla Harris, and I am with the People Institute, and welcome to Conversations with Carla. Today, we are talking about going back to work. After weeks and weeks of being home, being quarantined, working remotely, the world has decided to reopen. And here in South Florida, we are reopening in phases, as many states are doing around the country. But what does that mean for us as employers? What does that mean for our employees as leaders? How are we making it safe? And what is our responsibility for making it safe for our employer, our employees, and our customers? So today I'm talking with Don Slesnick. He is the managing partner of Slesnick and Casey here in Coral Gables, Florida. So let's just get right to it. Please, you are welcome. We always want your comments. We always want your questions. This is a timely topic, so just join the conversation. Let's welcome Don.
Well, good morning,
Hey, Don.
Carla.
Hey, how
Hi.
are you?
I'm okay, Carla. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being a part of Conversations with Carla. I really appreciate your being here. So let's just jump right into it. So we talked a little bit before going live
I have
that
to say, at the beginning, this is an exciting week because they're opening the barber shops, and my wife is really excited.
I understand. You know, a lot of us are tired of doing our self care when we're accustomed to having things done for us. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So Don, let's just talk about it. Are we really ready to go back to work?
Well, I think that certainly there's a lot of people ready to go back. It's interesting. There are some people who now enjoy working from home if they've been doing that remote work, but it's a certain age group. I think that there's a lot of young parents that are very ready to go back to work because they've been homeschooling their children along with the teachers from the schools, and I think they're getting a little stir crazy. As far as are we ready to go back to work scientifically, I think that's questionable. Obviously, you watch the debates on TV. People are concerned that there is no vaccine, that there is no cure for the virus, and we're not sure exactly what happens when we start getting out and moving around. So, being careful is the first thing that people have to consider. Using common sense, trying to remain socially distanced, trying to remain clean, healthy hands, washing, hand sanitizers, mask. There's a certain level of each of these things. First of all, common sense, as I said. Then, secondly, there are local guidelines that we need to follow. And then, thirdly, there are federal laws and state laws. So it's a whole different sort of level of things that you need to consider in going back to work. I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking this. I was thinking this morning in preparing for our conversation that if I were a business that has not been operating on site for at least over a month now, the first thing I think I would do is check with the management of the office building in which you're located and checking with the management of that building to determine certain things like have the bathrooms been cleaned? Is there a plan for cleaning the spaces that are public spaces? How about the elevators? Are they being operated and are they being controlled for how many people at a time get in the elevators? And are there sanitizing stations at the general entrance to the building? So,
Yeah, yeah.
so concerning yourself with the condition of your building is important before you even then start thinking about your own office space. And in the
Mm-hmm.
office space, a lot of the common sense things overlap into what the local guidelines are that the mayor's issued. And that is having sanitizing stations at your entrance of your business, making sure that your employees are distanced, hopefully with partitions between their workspaces, and trying to consider how many people can continue to work remotely as opposed to bringing them back on site. And those that you bring back on site, you need to be concerned with who has reported to have contacted the virus, who has reported to have been infected with the virus. Are you going to use a questionnaire to determine who is physically, medically capable of coming back to work? Do you have certain high-risk employees over 65 or with underlying medical conditions like diabetes? Things that you need to consider before bringing them back into your workspace.
Sure, sure. So let's take this sort of one chunk at a time. So you talked about people or employers still having their employees work remotely. And I posted, or we have a post coming out talking about the steps of what to put in place, and understanding that maybe some employers want to do a phased in return to work. So, you come and you work 3 days a week from home, 2 days a week at the office. So let's talk about this video conferencing requirement when people are working remotely. A colleague of mine and I had a conversation, I guess about 2 weeks ago, and the company that she works with wanted to require that employees have their video on when they're on like Zoom or GoToMeeting or something like that, these video conferencing. So what she said is that no, employers can't do that because it's illegal. It's an invasion of privacy. Now, mind you, she's not an attorney, and neither am I. So we come to you, the expert. Is there a protocol around something like that? Is it an invasion of privacy? I mean, can employers say you must be on video when we're in a meeting? I mean, what are employers to do?
Well, in preparing for this conversation, you asked me that question a week ago, and I went looking for some precedent to find out, is there a protocol? Is there a specific legal application that we can apply to the question? And I could not find it exactly.
Okay.
However, let's talk about some of the considerations. Number one is, first of all, you are not required to let employees work from home.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, they are working there at your leisure. Uh, it may be for your benefit, but it's still, you're the employer and you can decide whether you need them on site or if they can work from home. Now, as a little twist on that, however, if in fact they are working at home because of American with Disabilities Act considerations and you have negotiated some accommodation for them to work at home, then we may have a legal application there. But I would think that certainly the employer should be considerate enough to find out, do we need the person on camera? Can I explain, if they challenge it, can I explain the rationale for why that person needs to be seen as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just heard? I mean, I think that this is going to require a lot of working together between employees and employers. But when you're working at home, you're still an employee and you're
Right.
still being paid to be there. Now, you also raise the issue of working at home and sometimes working 3 days, coming in 2 days. People have got to be concerned too about wage and hour regulations. Wage and hour regulations, as you know, require timekeeping and require overtime payments for over 40. And when people are working at various sites, it's going to have to be a very structured way in which you can keep time. And if they are exempt employees, if they are executive level employees or administrative employees, and I believe that the salary threshold now is around $36,000 a year
Mm-hmm.
for exempt employees. They are people that, first of all, you cannot just pay part-time wages to. You got to pay a full salary to. But they don't have to work the full week. They don't have to be around. They are not on a time clock. But
Hmm.
it's that you cannot, if people think that they can let them work part-time and deduct part of their salary, that's a mistake, and they're going to have wage and hour problems. So you have layers, like I said in the beginning, layers of regulations that you need to be concerned with. And certainly some of the federal regulations like the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is wage and hour, Americans with Disability Act, which is talks about those high-risk employees. And then, of course, you have the very new, if you will, 2-month-old, the Families First Coronavirus Recovery Act, which
Yeah.
provides for exceptional sick leave, exceptional extension of the Families Medical Leave Act. I mean, you've got a whole variety of things that you need to consider. I would think that a lot of your viewers are small businesses. or relatively small businesses. And so
Mhm.
they need to become very familiar with the Families First Recovery Act because it applies to businesses under 500 people. But also, there is an exemption for businesses under 50 people, which they need to consider. But those exemptions are based on explanations by the employer. It's
Right.
an automatic exemption, but needs to be, if challenged, needs to be defended if you're going to exempt yourself from the Families First Act. And
Gotcha.
that's the
Gotcha.
one, and that's the one that provides the 14-day medical leave that is paid medical leave. It expands the Families Medical Leave Act and so forth. So all kinds of considerations. It's a When I was preparing for this, I started making some notes, and I decided, Carla, that we need about 18 and a half hours for this conversation.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have that time, but I do. We are getting some questions from folks who are online with us. So I encourage you to join the conversation. Just put your questions right here in the chat, and we will happily have either address them with Don or they'll be a part of the conversation. So let's just go before I get into a little bit. Let's see what we say. So first of all, let's say good morning. Marty's with us. Glenn is with us from Land Infotech. Angelique is our chef that's joining us from New Jersey, Don. So we have folks all the way from
Yeah.
New Jersey. We have people from
Was
Texas.
Angelique your guest last week?
Yes, she
Yes,
was.
I watched
Yes,
that.
yes, yes.
No, very
Good.
good.
Yeah, she was great. We have some other folks from Texas here with us, so I'm really excited. So let's get to Glenn's question first. So Glenn says, as an attorney, are you ready to open your office to clients, or are you still preferring to work remotely?
Well, our office is a little strange in the sense that we represent a variety of law enforcement officers and nurses who have been on the front line the entire time. And so while they are on the front line, we have stayed open and have conducted our business from our offices, staying socially separated, using masks when we pass each other, and having sanitized stations and so forth. So, and we've posted, oh, that's another thing we need to talk about. You need to post all the different warnings from the CDC. That's actually required by the law and required by local guidelines. So we've done all that, but we've stayed in business. Now, we have not had clients coming in. We have
Mm-hmm.
done our client consultations remotely. We've actually done hearings remotely. I've testified in a hearing remotely. Starting today, however, my law partner is actually at a internal review investigation proceeding alive in person at the police department. So things are starting to open up like that. But obviously, the courts are not holding hearings except by remote and by video, Zoom, and so forth. So we have a little mixture, but we have not had clients in the office.
Okay. Okay.
And actually, that was a consideration from our staff too.
Good, good, good. So, so Karen has a question, and it sort of goes to my next question. So, to you, legal liabilities of employers when employees are returning to work. So, Karen says if an employee is required to go to the office and does not feel comfortable because of the pandemic, does the employer have a legal right to fire that employee? And if so, can the employee collect unemployment?
Well, the employer has a legal right to dismiss, furlough, or fire a person who cannot perform their duties and will not perform their duties unless they have some other protections through the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if in fact they are covered by the Families First Act, they of course have a right to take sick leave for certain conditions, like home care for their children and who are out of school or themselves, or if they are ill or sick. And I think the employer needs to be very careful for firing someone who can prove that they are in fact disabled by the coronavirus or by conditions caused by the coronavirus. But yes, if in fact that they are dismissed, they have a right to collect unemployment. Um, the time when you have no right to collect unemployment is when you're dismissed for cause, and that's for misconduct or other actions that need to be defended by the employer. In this day and age, under these conditions, I would say that most anybody is going to be eligible for unemployment insurance.
Okay, so I want to pivot to that just for a second because the joy of a conversation is it's just that, right? A conversation.
That's
So
it.
let's talk about
Can
unemployment.
I have
So
a sip of my tea while we're conversing?
yes, you can. You can have a sip of your tea. So unemployment, there are just everywhere you look, there are challenges with unemployment. Sole proprietors are having issues because maybe they don't pay into unemployment on a regular basis. So they're having some issues because they can't prove the threshold for the income requirement for unemployment. You're having some folks just have to wait long spans of time, and here in Florida, that has been a major issue. So, can you talk a little bit about what uh, residents can do as it relates, one, to folks who are self-employed? As you mentioned, there are a number of self-employed small business owners who are watching us right now. And is there any issue, or how do they counter? I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of right now, but how do they counter when it takes so long for the unemployment applications to be processed?
Well, obviously, the state of Florida unemployment compensation has been bogged down by the sheer numbers of applications. Um, I mean, no one was ready for what we have seen happen. No one was prepared to handle the thousands upon thousands upon tens of thousands of applications that have swamped that office. So I think that the wait time and the backlog is simply that. It's not so much because of rules or regulations. It's just the workload that people
Mm-hmm.
are trying to handle. And of course, the state, like everyone else, is concerned and has had people working from home and remotely, and some people not working at all. I mean, so they weren't prepared for this. But it's a very interesting situation that you get into. That I was talking to a restaurateur the other day, and he was saying it's going to be an interesting thing to see if restaurants can restaff, because right now, if in fact the person has been processed and is on work unemployment, the fact is they're getting 200 and something dollars from the state and $600 overlap from the federal government, 800 something dollars a week. And there is no restaurant in town paying staff
Yeah.
$800 something dollars a week. So he was saying that it's going to be very interesting to see who comes back to work and forfeits their unemployment compensation. I think that the federal $600 is due to expire at the end of July, which is
Mm-hmm.
still 2 months away. And if it's not extended, now, the question then becomes, well, what if they're offered their job back and they refuse to go back to stay on unemployment? In normal circumstances, that would disqualify them from unemployment because they have an opportunity to work. Under these circumstances, number one, we just talked about the backlog. I have no idea how they're going to start tracing down those people who have been offered their job back and then disqualify them. And secondly, it's really kind of a hard time to start disqualifying people. I mean, we have the emotional factors that are involved, not legal, but emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have the compassion factors that are involved. We have considerations that go way beyond just the legal aspects. So it's a very unsettling and interesting time. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
trite to say now. We're all unsettled and all of us are interested in the future. But when you talk about these employment issues, that certainly holds true.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say we have a
But let
couple.
me say this, and
Sure.
this is something I would always stress, is that you've asked me several questions, and you asked me to prepare for several, and there are so many questions that employer needs to, number one, become familiar with the law as much as they can as laypersons, and secondly, they need to talk to an attorney about specific issues. We can have this conversation, but there are so many specific issues that need to be researched. And there are certain attorneys that specialize in unemployment compensation. It's a very
Mm-hmm.
particular, most generalized labor and employment lawyers do not do unemployment. It's a very specialized area.
Good, good. Thank you. And I think I probably should have said that in the beginning, that we are in no way giving legal advice. We are simply having a conversation
Yeah.
about what people, may be feeling, and what some of it's kind of a foundation for now. Where do you go from here? So thank you. I appreciate that. So Christy Gray says, "Hi, Mayor." So of course I did not say
Christy.
that Christy Grace said, hi, Mayor. Love Mayor Slesnick. So for all of you who don't know, Don Slesnick is the former mayor of Coral Gables, Florida. So we have a coup here. So thank you again so much for joining us. So Jerome Hutchinson says, good morning, Carla. Are employers required to provide computers to employees if they're working from remotely?
Well, I definitely think that if an employer is going to require an employee to work on a computer, and if they're working remotely, yes, I would say that they need to supply the equipment that the employee needs to work. I don't believe that an employee is employed with the expectation that they must have certain equipment at home to do work. Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, that they need to supply the equipment that's needed to work.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I do represent groups that have thousands of employees, and that question hasn't really come up. I mean, I think it hasn't come up because luckily, unfortunately, most people these days have computers and have the capability of Zoom and cameras and so forth. But if you require someone to have a piece of equipment, you should supply it.
Okay, that sounds normal. So let's take a look at Rory. So Rory says, as an independent contractor, would I be required to sign a hold harmless waiver to be on a production set? Must I be required to use my liability insurance to work or for work, or is that the responsibility of the production company?
Great question. I don't have an answer. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I can give a common sense answer, but I think that that's a question that really needs to be handled by Rory's attorney um, and answered specifically, because I think if we get into a discussion of this, we may be giving bad advice. So.
Okay, good, good. So we talked about the employers and what the employers are required to do. What onus is on the employee to take care of themselves as they transition back to work?
Well, one thing is that I think that the employee needs to be prepared to answer questions. And normally, certain questions are disallowed by the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, there have been new guidances put out by the federal government allowing, in this time of pandemic, things to take place which would not normally take place. One is the employer has a right to ask questions about the employee's health and about the employee's experiences while they've been away from work or away from the work site. And the employer has a right to take temperatures as the employees enter the office. Um, and and then monitor employees' health, which is normally not either. It's frowned upon and not allowed in many cases. But in this day and age with pandemic, we are now starting to loosen that up so that employers can guarantee the healthy and safe working environment. Now, if you're going to take temperatures when employees come to work, depending on how many employees you have, obviously, if you only have one or two, it may not be an issue. But if you've got more, you need to consider, though, that there is a privacy aspect. So you need to set up some type of system for taking temperatures, offering privacy to the employee and so forth. You have to make sure that there's a separation of employees. You can't have a gaggle of employees standing around for their temperature to be taken. You need to have social distancing. You have to have a place to do it. And then you've got to be concerned about how much information you can pass to other employees about that employee's health conditions. If the employee has no particular apparent health conditions, then that becomes a moot point. You don't need to. But there are certain times when you may need to warn employees because of now trying to trace and take care of the fact that people come in contact with COVID infected people. We need to find out who has been in contact and so forth. So you have a whole nother area of that you need to worry about, and that is sharing information about one employee with other employees.
Okay, okay. So a couple things. First of all, and we're wrapping up a little bit here. Most small businesses don't have HR departments. So are we talking about assigning that role to a particular person? What would you recommend for that? Because obviously there are HIPAA laws and things like that that have to be adhered to. So what's your thought around companies that don't have specific HR departments?
Okay, well, you've raised an interesting question. And who does HIPAA apply to? And it does not apply to most employers. Okay, it applies
Oh.
to
Hmm.
medical providers and healthcare institutions and so forth. So that is another area that you've got to kind of weed your way through and decide whether what HIPAA restrictions apply to you or if they don't at all.
Hmm. Hmm.
However, you raise a good issue, and that is this is a very small office that you're talking to. And so, I or my law partner would certainly take care of any of the things that we're talking about. We would do that personally. But yes, assigning a person, a competent, capable person to start to handle drawing up guidelines, drawing up an SOP, standard operating procedures to handle these things, making sure that all the restrictions and or guidance is posted and distributed, making sure that everyone in the workplace has a copy of what you intend to do and very specifically laid out so they understand. There should be no misunderstandings. Communications is critically important, making sure that everyone is on the same play sheet, if you will, and just being smart, making sure that whatever you're doing is in conformance guidelines. Now, you raise the interesting point that they don't have HR departments. Well, number one, we are very blessed with the internet, and
Yeah.
and I would not just go to any internet site and take that advice, but you can go to the Department of Labor site. You can read the most frequently asked questions, which are in plain English and they are understandable. It's FAQ, frequently asked questions. Department of Labor will explain Department of Labor standards and the guidelines that they've issued. You can go to Miami-Dade County or Broward County websites to get the guidance that's been issued by the county administrators or the county mayors. So you have a lot of access to guidance just in regular on your computer. On the
Hmm.
other hand, if it comes down to a critical question where an employee is questioning your guidance and so forth, um, hopefully you can call an attorney who will be glad at a relatively inexpensive cost to give you guidance on the phone or by internet connection without a major expense.
Hmm.
Um, but but I think that as long as you play it smart, play it cautiously, try to be well informed, communicate with your employees, you're probably not going to be seeing a whole bunch of legal tough issues to tackle. You just need to be wise in your approach and to understand where we are. And I would
Sure.
say, and I would say, try to be as compassionate as you can afford to be. Um,
Hmm.
and if you're a small company under 50, remember you can get relief from the Families First Act, the Corona Response Act, but you need to look at the guidelines for getting that relief because you need to be able to explain why you're seeking relief and not providing the extra sick leave and extra Families Medical Leave Act that it provides for.
Hmm. So I want to take one last question before I get to your three things that you'd like us to take away. So Jose asked a question, says, what is required if an employee comes down with coronavirus, let's say an office of 50 people, is the employer required to test everyone and or close the office for 14 days?
Well, let me say hi to Jose first of all, and
Yes.
secondly, and hi to Mel. But
Yes.
secondly, though, and to answer the question, I do not believe that you're required to test everyone or to have a automatic shutdown for 14 days. I think that it would be wise to make sure who came in contact with the person, and it would be wise to test people who had any type of contact with the person. And if, in fact, you have more than one person that's now infected, you may be wise to start sending people home and closing down for a period of time to CDC guidelines, which is, I believe, he's correct, 14 days. But it depends on the circumstances, depends on how many people were contacted or where that employee was and so forth. But
Hmm.
yes, testing, you can require tests. That's the first thing. You can require tests. And if you certainly have reasonable suspicion to require that test, and you should, and hope if you find more than one employee, I just guess you need to make some wise decisions about how you're going to handle it. And I certainly would not expose anyone unnecessarily.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, as I always like to do, and we're wrapping up, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. So, what are the top three things you would leave us with as we are looking, both as employers and employees, as we're looking to transition to the workplace?
Get a haircut, get your nails done. Okay, as you're really okay, the first thing is go to the most understandable guidelines and regulations, which are your county and city regulations. Understand them first. Be in compliance with your city and your county. That's the first thing. The second thing is go to the website of the Department of Labor and read the frequently asked questions about the Department of Labor laws and regulations. And those are in plain English and understandable. And thirdly, is be compassionate with your employees, try to understand their needs, and really think smartly about how to reopen the offices and take all the precautions you can within your ability and affordability. And then finally, I'll add a fourth one. This is the time to plan the future of your business. This is the time to decide how it is that you're going to operate from now going forward and how you can stay in business. It's really important because
Absolutely.
you won't do your employees any good if you're not in business.
And one quick question. So the FAQ, because I'd like to put this in the chat. The FAQ is FAQs at.
Well, no, you just go Department of Labor and
Mhm.
then ask for the frequently asked questions. It
Okay.
comes up pretty easily.
Okay. Perfect. And then you mentioned a couple times
You
about.
may have to say U.S. Department of Labor. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
No problem. I'll find the link and put the link in the chat. Also, you've mentioned a couple times about the posting the
Yeah,
warnings, posting what we need. So, as an employee, of course, you get the wage and hour report. I mean,
right.
posters and things like that.
Yeah,
Is that a similar thing?
it is, and there are CDC. You can go to the website, go to the CDC website, and I think actually the counties reproduce them too. I think on the Dade County side, at least, that they have all those postings that are part of the guidelines. I would assume it's true in Broward County too. And for those of you in Texas and New Jersey, I have to assume that those states and those counties are doing the same thing. Those are pretty easy to find, but there are posters for you to post from the CDC.
Okay, perfect. Don, thank you so much. This has been such a timely and engaging conversation. I
Thank you,
really
Carla.
appreciate you being here. You take
I,
care.
you take care. Everybody out there, stay safe, stay healthy, and welcome back to work.
That's right. That's right. So join us Monday, 10 o'clock. Every Monday we're here, and Monday coming is Memorial Day, and we will be talking about fashion and style. We need a little bit of break from this whole virus thing. So
And
see you
also
Monday.
remember the veterans on that day.
And remember the veterans. That's right. Don, thanks again. See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.